DP-21 strike fighters. Back in the days of the Colony War, there were the UC Navy's sharpest blade. Fast, deadly, everywhere at once. Rumor has it, these birds hit the Freestar Collective so hard, they had to overhaul their entire Starfighter Corps just to keep up. Nowadays, they're in the hands of Greenhorn Planetary Defense Squads, Titan Security, Sidonia Planetary Defense, just kids with clean uniforms and shaky trigger fingers. Now that makes them easy pickings. You see, some of us in the Crimson Fleet, we fought these things in the war. We know what they can do, and more importantly, we know how to take them. See my bird over there? I call her the Furia. And let me be clear, she is no stock DP-21. Her standard payload could be ripped out. Swap the concussion missile launchers for twin T-65 proton torpedoes. The spectral lasers, they're gone. I'm running FS ion pulse cannons now. And those old Mahler 105s, will Jazz help me rebuild them with net-accelerated bolt relays and kinetic recyclers. Now, they spit fire 20 times faster than factory spec. Under the hood, Jazz did it again. She boosted reactor output and grav drive efficiency with the new J-Tide cooling system. For stealth, shoot. I stole a pair of Incom-X scan jammers from a SysDef hauler, so smuggling's never been smoother. I have no room for dead weight inside this ship. Everything has a purpose, and everything is where I need it to be. So you get one warning. If you spot the Furia on your radar, don't get curious. Don't get brave. Your ship will be scrapped. Your cargo will be mine. And you, just another story, cut short in the void of space.
Alright, shipwrights. Welcome to another LEC build. Quick announcement before we get into the build. I've just launched a Discord server and you're all welcome to join. It's called LEC Star Yards and it's mainly focused on the shipbuilding side of Starfield. So if you ever wanted to showcase your own ships, this is going to be a great place for that. I have dedicated channels for you to upload your various role ships, ask for questions about builds or load orders, and a place for you to submit your own modified versions of my ships too. Depending on how the submissions go, I would love to highlight a favorite community ship in each new video upload. That said, it's open to all Starfield players, got channels for gameplay, outposts, help sections, and general discussion too. If you want to join, the invite link is in the description. Now, on to the build. With the last one being the largest ship to date, we're going the opposite route today with a smaller one. So a while back, I made an attempt at making the Fury class interceptor from Star Wars: The Old Republic. It actually came at the request from a few of you, and it turned out to be one of the most popular ship uploads that I've ever had on this channel. But one thing that always bothered me with the actual Fury class is its overall size. I never really understood why that ship was classified as an interceptor, because in Star Wars lore, that ship is huge. Like, it sits at around 100 by 80 meters, which puts it on par with gunships or light frigates in terms of ship class sizing within the Star Wars universe. And since I'm a fan of this kind of downswept, dual-prong wedge design, I've always wanted to make a true fighter or interceptor version of that Darklighter build, and today, that is what we'll be doing. I also took some inspiration from the Eta II Jedi interceptors with their S-foils down. So in my opinion, this does have a lot of Star Wars vibes to it. Now, just like the Darklighter, this smaller version is meant to be a United Colonies ship. But because all the UC affiliated manufacturers have these elongated cockpits, I'm stuck once again using the Hope Tech Armstrong cockpit. So hopefully you don't mind the use of some Freestar related parts here. That's one of the main reasons why this ship and the Darklighter are both UC ships that were stolen by Crimson Fleet personnel in my own headcanon lore. I also intended for this to be a Class A ship since the J-type components are available in Class A and Class C configurations, but the Class A versions of the Falkland Systems Thrax cannons are just too weak on extreme difficulty, which is what I usually play on. So I stuck with Class C here. Hopefully that doesn't bother you too much as well. And that leads me to my next point. Aside from one weapon slot, this ship is completely free to build. The only paid mod being used here is Falkland Systems for those Thrax cannons, so if you don't have any paid mods or you just use Nexus mods, you'll have to use a different weapon attachment here. And last but not least, this ship is pretty easy to build. Like, outside of looking for the parts, the actual build process for this ship takes about 10 minutes or so to build. The latter section of the video is just fine-tuning the greebling and the components of the ship. But always remember, if you have any questions or you get stuck anywhere, feel free to reach out to me in the comments. Alright, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this build as much as I did, because this one's turning out to be one of my personal favorites. Gotta say, I really do enjoy building out these smaller ships with these cozier interiors, and if you ask me, this thing looks good in just about any color and from just about any angle. I think I'll eventually do another build just like this that'll slot between this one and the Class M Darklighter in terms of sizing. I don't know when, but I'll get to it eventually. And remember, if you're interested, I just started a shipbuilding Discord server, and I would love to see all your ships, as well as your modifications to my builds. So feel free to join. The invite link is in the description. Hopefully you were able to get this build done without any issues, but as always, feel free to reach out to me in the comments if you have any questions or build requests, or if you just want to chat all things Starfield and shipbuilding. This is Lindan, signing off. See you in the Starfield.